Welcome, restless souls, to another sleepless night with Mr. Insomnia. Tonight, we step inside 3 haunted apartments where the walls whisper, shadows watch, and the line between reality and nightmare disappears. Keep your doors locked, your lights dimmed, and whatever you do, don't fall asleep. Before we begin, like this video and subscribe to the channel, because these haunted tales are just the beginning and the nightmares are far from over. When I first decided to move into the building, I told myself it was temporary. Just a few months. That's what I kept repeating as I dragged the last of my boxes up the narrow stairwell. The complex was old, the kind of place that had seen better days long before I arrived. Its gray concrete walls were streaked with water stains, the paint peeling in patches. There was a constant faint smell of rust and mildew that seemed to cling to the hallways. Even the air felt heavy, like it hadn't moved in decades. The rent was cheap, suspiciously cheap, but the city's housing prices were insane, and I had no choice. The landlord, a stocky man with thinning gray hair and a permanent scowl, didn't ask questions. He handed me a set of keys with a grunt, muttering something like, "Keep your door locked and your nose down." I nodded, eager to just get inside and settle. Apartment 409 was on the 4th floor at the far end of a long, narrow hallway. My window looked out onto the cracked street below, where yellowed streetlights flickered against the uneven pavement. Across the hallway was 410. At first glance, it was just another door, faded and worn. I didn't think much of it. But that door, 410, would soon become the focus of every uneasy thought I had in my waking hours and every restless moment I spent awake at night. The first time I noticed him, or thought I did, was my second night. I had come home late from work, tired and eager to crash in the cramped apartment I was barely unpacked in. The hallway was quiet, lit by a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed faintly. As I rounded the corner near my door, I froze. He was there, standing perfectly still by 410, the door slightly open. He didn't move, didn't glance at me. His posture was stiff, unnaturally rigid, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. Even in the dim light, I could tell he was tall and thin. His face, I would later describe it as wrong, frozen in the faintest semblance of a smile, almost like the last frame of a paused video. "Hey," I said awkwardly, raising a hand. Nothing. No blink, no twitch, no acknowledgement. The air around him seemed thicker, heavier, as if gravity itself had shifted. I swallowed hard, heart hammering, and hurried into my apartment, locking the door behind me. The next morning, I left for work, and, against all reason, he was still there. Same posture, same spot, staring out toward the street below. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some leftover art project, a mannequin someone had left behind, some prank. But when I returned 12 hours later, he was still there, unmoving. Same clothes, same expression. A knot of dread began forming in my chest. That gut-level, instinctive fear that tells you something is very, very wrong. Over the next few days, the pattern didn't change. No matter the hour, he stood by the window of 410. I began checking through my peephole before leaving. The hallway lights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Sometimes, in the orange glow, I could just make out his figure, unmoving, watching, something I couldn't see. Curiosity got the better of me one night. I quietly stepped out into the hallway. "Hey man, you okay?" I called softly. He didn't answer, didn't even flinch. I stepped closer, my sneakers squeaking on the worn linoleum. The temperature seemed to drop as I approached him. "Sir, do you live here?" I tried again. That's when I saw his eyes. They weren't empty. They were focused, but not on the street. They were staring at a reflection, something in the hallway behind me, something I couldn't see. And then, for the briefest second, his lips twitched into a faint smile. That was enough. I backed into my apartment, heart pounding, and locked the door. For the next week, I avoided 410 entirely. I took the stairs instead of walking past his door. But even in my apartment, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night to soft creaking outside my door, or faint whispers, like a distant radio playing through thin walls. One morning, I realized my front door had been left unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it before bed. Eventually, I asked the landlord about the neighbor across the hall. 410? He said, looking up from his clipboard. "You sure about that number?" "Yes. The guy who stands by the window all night," I said. The landlord frowned. "That unit's empty." "Has been for years," I laughed nervously. "Impossible. I see him every day." He sighed. "Kid, 410's been vacant since before I bought the building. The last tenant didn't leave quietly." "What do you mean?" He shook his head. "If you're smart, you'll keep your door locked and your eyes down." That night, I couldn't sleep. At around 3 a.m., I got up for a glass of water. Passing the hallway near 410, I froze. A soft tap, tap, tap came from the floor. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Then tap, tap, tap. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I peeked through the peephole. He was standing there, facing my door this time, motionless, expressionless, eyes dark and hollow, fixated on the peephole. I backed away, holding my breath. He didn't move again. Then, faint footsteps receded down the hallway. I stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, the door to 410 was open. Inside, the apartment was empty. No furniture, no curtains, just bare wooden floors coated in dust. And yet, there were footprints, dozens, all leading to the window, none leading back. After seeing the footprints in 410, I should have moved immediately. Rationally, I knew it. Logically, it made no sense to stay in a place where something, or someone, clearly didn't belong. But part of me was trapped in fascination, a morbid curiosity that wouldn't let go. I began noticing things in my apartment that didn't make sense. The air smelled different, not just musty, like any old building, but metallic, like rust or dried blood. Lights flickered constantly, even in the middle of the day. Sometimes my phone alarm would go off at 3 a.m., even though I never set it. I started leaving notes to myself, marking the times things happened, hoping to see a pattern. But there was none. Only chaos, creeping in slowly, like smoke filling a room. One evening, brushing my teeth, I caught movement in the bathroom mirror. A shadow, tall and still, lingering just beyond the door. My reflection didn't move with it. I spun around. Nothing. Just the dim light of my small bathroom, bouncing off pale tiles. But when I turned back to the mirror, the shadow was closer. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like something had pressed down inside the room. I froze. The door was slightly ajar, just like 410's had been. My heart pounded, a dull, heavy drum in my chest. I didn't stay to investigate. I ran to the living room, checked the locks on my door, secure, thankfully. But the sense of being watched didn't leave me. It lingered, pressing against my mind like a cold, unrelenting hand. A few days later, I forced myself to confront the landlord again. "Look," I said, leaning across his cluttered desk. "Something's happening in 410. I need to know who lived there. What happened?" He stiffened. His pen stopped scratching across his clipboard. "You don't want to know," he said, his tone sharper now. "I need to know," I insisted. "There's something there. I've seen it." He sighed and ran a hand through his thinning hair. "The man who lived there, name was Elias Cole. Quiet guy, kept to himself, never spoke to anyone, always stared out the window, didn't hurt anyone. But one day, the neighbor below complained about water leaking from the ceiling." I frowned. "Water?" "Yeah," he said, voice dropping. "Maintenance went to check. Found him standing, dead. For days, I felt the blood drain from my face. Dead? Yeah. Body cold. Window locked from the outside. Police said he'd been facing inward, toward the room, never toward the window. Nobody knew why. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Just keep your door locked, kid, and stay away from 410. That night, curiosity twisted into compulsion. I had to see. I had to know if 410 was still empty. The hallway was silent, heavy. The fluorescent lights buzzed, casting long, wavering shadows. The door was closed, but unlocked. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. Inside, the apartment was exactly as I had seen it before. Bare, cold, empty. Dust covered the floors, but this time there were new marks on the walls, carved, scratched into the plaster beside the window. He never stopped looking. I felt my stomach drop. Every instinct screamed to leave. Then, in the reflection of the grimy window, I saw him, standing there, directly behind me. Head tilted, lips stretched into that same faint, terrifying smile. I spun around. Nothing. The apartment was empty. But the air had changed. It felt electric, thick, almost alive. And slowly, the faint outline of fingerprints appeared on the glass, pressing from the inside. They traced the shape of a body, hand by hand, forming as if someone, or something, was trying to escape the window. I bolted. Over the next few nights, the hauntings worsened. Objects in my apartment moved slightly. My shoes shifted an inch. A cup on the counter was facing a different way. Doors that I had locked were sometimes left wide open. I started hearing whispers through the walls, soft and rhythmic, like a distant radio. But when I tried to follow the sound, it vanished. Sleep became impossible. Every creak, every tap, every flicker of light made my chest tighten. I was living in a constant state of alert, half paralyzed by fear, half driven by the obsession I couldn't shake. One night, at 3:17 a.m., I woke to a soft knock at my door. Tap, tap, tap. My hand shook as I pressed my eye to the peephole. The man from 410 stood there, motionless, expressionless, eyes hollow, fixated on me. For what felt like hours, I stared back through the tiny glass. Then, just as silently as he appeared, he was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The days after my visit to 410 became a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. I barely left my apartment. When I did, it was only to grab groceries or check the mail. And even then, I kept my head down, avoiding the hallway as much as possible. I started leaving early for work, returning late, hoping to minimize contact with whatever was lurking across the hall. But the building itself seemed alive. The flickering lights no longer felt random. They pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat. The air grew heavier each day, thick with dust, mildew, and and something metallic I couldn't place. My apartment, once a small sanctuary, now felt like a trap. And the hallway. Every time I stepped into it, I felt the presence of someone standing behind me, watching, waiting. I started digging, not online. The building was old, barely listed anywhere, but in old city records and newspapers. And what I found chilled me more than any shadow in a hallway ever could. Elias Cole. The name came up repeatedly, always in small, obscure articles, buried in old microfilm or faded newspaper clippings. He had moved into 410 almost 10 years ago. A quiet man, no family, no visitors. Neighbors described him as polite but odd, always alone, always standing by the window for hours, sometimes for entire days, staring outward with a fixed, empty expression. Children who played in the street below whispered about the man in 410, calling him the window watcher. The report stopped abruptly one winter. According to an old police blotter, neighbors had complained about water leaking into the apartment below 410. Maintenance entered the unit and found him, dead, but not lying down, not sitting, standing, eyes wide, posture rigid. The police report, blurry, faded in the microfilm, mentioned that the window was sealed shut from the outside, yet his body was facing inward toward the room, not toward the street. No cause of death was ever officially released. Some papers hinted at dehydration, others at something more unexplained. Even stranger, I found notes about the building itself. It had been built in the 1950s, an old mid-rise in downtown Chicago, designed as low-income housing. But over the decades, tenants kept disappearing. Rare, small news items, 4 tenants missing over 10 years, all on the 4th floor. The articles never mentioned Elias Cole, but the coincidences were impossible to ignore. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I decided to face 410 again, not out of courage, more like inevitability. I needed to know if what I was seeing was real, or if I was losing my mind. The hallway was colder than usual. The fluorescent lights buzzed low, almost whispering. I reached the door. The knob turned easily. I pushed it open. The apartment was empty, silent, cold. The same layer of dust covered the floor. But now, the shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker, reaching out like fingers across the walls. And then I saw it. A small notebook lying on the floor near the window, covered in dust. But the last page was open, as if someone had been writing recently. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. They never leave. I can't stop them. They watch, always. Even when I close my eyes, they're there. He never stopped looking. The words made my chest tighten. I didn't know if I was reading the ramblings of a madman or the last thoughts of Elias Cole himself. I took a hesitant step back. Then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible breathing coming from behind me. I spun around, empty apartment, but the air had shifted, heavier, vibrating with a low hum I could feel in my bones. I glanced at the window, and in the reflection, I saw him. Not across the hall, not in the doorway, but standing behind me, head tilted, lips stretched in that faint, impossible smile. Hollow eyes, fixed, watching. I stumbled back, my heart hammering, my breath ragged. The shadows seemed to pulse. The walls groaned. The notebook fell to the floor, pages flipping open to the same message. He never stopped looking. The fingerprints on the window began to appear again, slowly, one by one, pressing outward, as if someone, or something, inside the room was reaching toward me. I fled. When I got back to my apartment, I locked every door and window, pulling the blinds tight. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I stayed awake, listening to the faint hum of the building, the whispers, the occasional tap on my door. I called the landlord the next morning. "Look, I need answers," I said, my voice tight. "What really happened in 410? He went silent for a long moment. Then, his voice low and firm. "You don't want to know everything, kid." That man, Elias Cole, he's not the worst thing that's happened on that floor. 4 tenants missing in 10 years, all 4th floor. Some say it's the building. Some say he didn't leave, not entirely. If you value your sanity, you'll move. Now, I started planning my escape, packing slowly, trying to act normal at work, hoping not to draw attention. But every night, the events escalated. Lights would flash in my apartment in strange patterns, almost like a code. I'd hear footsteps pacing outside my door, slow and deliberate, stopping when I stopped. Whispers calling my name, just at the edge of hearing, always in the dead of night. And then, one night, I woke up to find my front door unlocked. Again. This time, I didn't check who was there. I didn't look. I bolted down the hall, out of the building, and didn't stop until I was halfway across the street. And when I looked back, I saw the door to 410 swing open slowly. A figure stood there, motionless, watching, smiling. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, knees drawn up, staring at the door. Every creak, every groan of the old building made me flinch. The faint hum of electricity in the walls sounded louder than ever, vibrating in my skull. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay. I had to get out. I started packing quietly, methodically, trying not to disturb anything. But even as I folded clothes into boxes, I felt the weight of something unseen pressing down. It started with the hallway. I had just stepped out of my apartment to carry a box down the hall when I froze. The air was heavier than usual, thick with cold and the metallic tang I had come to recognize. And there he was, standing in front of 410, motionless, head tilted, lips curved in that faint, terrifying smile, eyes hollow, fixed, watching me. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I thought about running, but some primal part of me, couldn't turn my back. And then he moved. Not a step, not a shift in posture, but the air around him seemed to ripple. Shadows stretched across the floor, longer than they should have been. My heart hammered as I realized the movement wasn't just mine. The hallway itself seemed alive, bending toward him. I backed into my apartment, slammed the door, and locked it. That night, things escalated further. The whispers returned, louder, insistent, footsteps pacing outside my door. I could feel the vibrations in the floor, in my chest. The lights flickered violently, plunging the apartment into darkness, then back into a dim glow. Then, the mirror. I had avoided looking at it, but some invisible force drew me. I turned, and in the reflection, he was there, closer than ever. Head tilted, lips curved in that same faint smile. Hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I spun around. Nothing. The apartment was empty. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure pressed a hand against the glass. One hand. And then another. Fingerprints appeared, slowly spreading across the surface, as if reaching for me. I screamed. I didn't stop running until I was outside the building. The street was quiet, the city lights dim and flickering in the distance. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes on me, but I didn't dare look back. Days passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I moved into a new apartment across town, one with bright lights, thick walls, and a doorman who kept an eye on the building entrance. Yet sometimes, late at night, I'd see him in the corner of my vision, tall, thin, still, watching. Months later, I looked up the building online. It had been shut down due to structural and electrical issues. The news articles mentioned tenants missing on the 4th floor, but no names were listed. Then, a photograph attached to one of the articles caught my corner of my eye. A shot of the building from the street, and in one of the windows, high above the others, I saw him, standing, staring out, watching. And even though the photo was grainy, even though it was hundreds of feet away, I could feel it. I could feel those hollow eyes fixated on me. He had never stopped looking. I never went back. I packed my life into boxes, left almost everything behind, and started over. But I carry that hallway, that window, that smile with me every day. Even now, when I close my eyes at night, I see the hallway stretching endlessly. I see the door of 410, and I feel the weight of someone or something still there, standing, motionless, smiling, watching. Because some things never leave. I used to think ghosts were bullshit. You know, stories people made up when they were bored, drunk, or lonely. But now, sitting here, writing this at 3:47 a.m., I know there are places where the line between reality and nightmare blurs so thin you can't tell which side you're on anymore. My name's Aaron. I'm a freelance graphic designer, the kind of guy who spends more time talking to his computer than to actual people. A few months ago, I found this cheap apartment downtown. Old building, quiet neighborhood, decent rent. It felt perfect for me. The building was called Shanti Residency, weird name for a rundown place like that, but whatever. The walls were yellowed. The elevator made a sound like a dying goat every time it moved, and the hallway lights flickered like a bad horror movie set. Still, it was quiet, and that's all I cared about. At least, that's what I thought. I moved into apartment 202. There was another apartment directly above mine, 302. The first few nights were fine, just the usual creaks of an old building settling. But around the 4th night, I started hearing footsteps from upstairs. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe my upstairs neighbor worked late or something. But there was something odd about them. They always started around 12:15 a.m., never earlier, never later. And they were slow, deliberate, not the random pacing of someone walking around their home. It was like someone tracing a pattern on the floor, step by step, from one corner of the room to the other. Then pause, then back again, for hours. Sometimes I'd hear the sound of furniture dragging, like a heavy chair being moved across the floor. Pause. Every night. Same sound, same time. I remember putting my headphones on one night to drown it out, but even through the music, I could still feel it, the faint vibration through the ceiling. It wasn't loud, but it felt intentional, like whoever was upstairs wanted me to know they were awake too. A week later, the sounds changed. It started as soft thuds, then faint, sobbing. Someone crying muffled, broken, like they were trying not to be heard. It always began after the footsteps stopped, around 3 a.m. I'd turn off my fan, hold my breath, and listen. A woman's voice. Sometimes it sounded like she was right above my bed, other times across the hall. But it was always coming from upstairs. I thought about going up there, I really did. But something about that sound, the way it wavered between sadness and something else, something that didn't sound entirely human, it kept me glued to my chair. By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the landlord. Mr. Desai was an old man who looked like he'd seen too much in life and stopped caring somewhere along the way. His office was this cramped little room near the entrance, stacked with papers, a rusty fan spinning lazily overhead. When I asked him about the tenant in 302, he gave me a long, confused look. "There's no one living there," he said flatly. "That apartment's been empty for 2 years. I actually laughed. "Come on, man. Someone's up there every night. I can hear them walking, crying, moving furniture." He cut me off. "No one lives there. I keep it locked. It's under renovation." I stared at him for a few seconds, waiting for him to crack a smile, but he didn't. He just sighed, like this was a conversation he'd had before. "Don't go up there, Aaron. That apartment, just leave it alone." His tone changed when he said that last part, like it wasn't advice, it was a warning. I didn't push him, but that night, the footsteps came back, louder this time, heavier, and I started to feel the first hint of fear. It was a Wednesday night when it happened. The kind of night where the city feels dead. No cars, no voices, just the hum of the streetlights outside. I was working late, as usual, headphones on, editing some logo for a client in Canada. Then the footsteps started again, 12:15 a.m. Exactly. Thump, 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 back and forth, back and forth. I paused my music and listened. The rhythm was off tonight, uneven, almost frantic. Then came the dragging sound again, but faster, harsher. Thop, thop, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor, scraping against the wood. I stared at the ceiling, every hair on my arm standing up. Then came a thud, loud enough to rattle the light fixture above me. And then a scream. It wasn't human. It started as a woman's cry, high and sharp, then twisted into something guttural, broken, like a dozen voices screaming through one throat. It stopped as suddenly as it began. And then came silence. Not the kind of silence you get when things calm down. This was the kind that presses on your ears, heavy, suffocating, like the air itself was waiting. I don't remember standing up, but I found myself in the hallway a few seconds later. The air was colder there, the kind of cold that bites through your clothes. I looked up the stairwell toward the 3rd floor. All the lights were off except one. The bulb outside apartment 302 flickered weakly, throwing long shadows across the walls. I took one step up, then another. My phone flashlight was shaking in my hand, the beam cutting through the darkness. When I reached the top, I stopped in front of 302. The door was slightly open. There was no sound coming from inside, no movement, just the smell. A damp, earthy smell, like mold and iron and something else. Something metallic. I nudged the door open with my foot. The apartment inside was empty. No furniture, no lights, nothing. Just bare wooden floors and walls stained with something dark near the corners. I stepped inside, calling out softly, "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the room. That's when I noticed it footprints. Dark, wet footprints leading from the center of the room toward the corner near the window. Bare feet, small. They ended at the wall. Just ended. Like whoever made them had walked straight into the plaster and vanished. And then I heard it, a single knock, from beneath me. Slow, heavy, coming from my apartment, the one directly below. And then silence. I ran downstairs so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. The stairwell lights flickered behind me, making it feel like the shadows were moving too. When I reached my door, I stopped. It was open. I know I locked it before going upstairs. I always do. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt wrong, heavier somehow. The smell from the apartment above had followed me down. That damp, metallic stench. I stood there in the doorway, listening. Silence. Then, faintly, the sound of something dripping. Drip, drip, drip. I followed the sound to my kitchen. The sink was dry. But the floor was wet. There was a small puddle near the fridge. I leaned down. The liquid was dark, sticky. For a second, I thought it was just water until the smell hit me. It wasn't water. I took a step back, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. That's when I heard a noise from the ceiling, a low creak. I looked up. Right above me, in the same spot where I'd seen the footprints upstairs, there was a dark stain spreading across the plaster. Thick, slow. It looked like something was leaking through the ceiling. I stumbled backward, grabbed my phone, and called the landlord. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. By now, the dripping had gotten faster. Drip, drip, drip. I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my keys, stepped outside, and slammed the door behind me. I was halfway down the hall when I heard a faint sound from behind my door. Knock, pause. Knock. Slow, measured. I froze. The knocking continued, but it wasn't coming from the hallway side. It was coming from inside my apartment. I don't know how long I stood there, listening. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than a minute. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like the whole building was holding its breath. I didn't go back inside that night. I booked a cheap motel a few blocks away and stayed there until morning. When I returned, the front door was still locked from the outside. Everything looked normal except for one thing. On the kitchen table, there was a glass of water. I hadn't poured it, and I lived alone. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. The glass wasn't just filled with water. Floating inside it was a single, small key. Old, rusted, the kind of key you'd see in an antique shop or a nightmare. I didn't recognize it. I picked it up carefully, wiping it dry with a tissue. It was heavier than it looked. There was a faint number engraved on the side, 302. My stomach dropped. I don't know what possessed me, but I went back upstairs. The hallway was bright now, sunlight filtering through the dusty window at the end. Everything looked so normal that I almost laughed at myself. The door to 302 was closed again, and this time, locked. I tried the key. It fit. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo down the entire hall. I hesitated for a long second, then pushed the door. The apartment looked the same as before, empty, quiet, lifeless. But there was something new now. A single chair stood in the middle of the room, facing the wall. Nothing else, no footprints, no stains, no smell. Just that chair. I walked closer, each step creaking on the wooden floor. The air was still too still. When I reached the chair, I saw something on the seat. A photo. It was old, faded, the corners curled. In it I saw a man sitting in the exact same spot, on that same chair, staring at the wall. His face was turned just enough for me to see the side of his mouth. He was smiling. And on the back of the photo, in shaky handwriting, were 2 words. "She's back." I dropped the picture. The second it hit the floor, every light in the apartment flickered. The bulb above me buzzed, humming louder and louder until it burst. Glass rained down around me, and in the brief flash before darkness, I saw it, a figure standing by the wall where the footprints had ended, long hair hanging down, head tilted slightly as if listening. Her skin was gray, stretched too tight over her bones, and she was smiling too. I bolted out of that apartment and didn't stop until I was outside, gasping in the morning air. I told myself I'd move out that day, pack my things, never look back. But when I went to the landlord's office, it was empty. The desk, the papers, the chair, all gone. The nameplate on the door was missing too, leaving just 2 small holes where it had been screwed in. I asked one of the neighbors if they'd seen Mr. Desai. They looked confused. "Mr. Desai? There hasn't been a landlord here for years. This building's been under new management since 2019. That was impossible. I'd spoken to him a week ago." They just shrugged and walked away. I went back to my room one last time. The walls felt colder now, the light dimmer. I packed my laptop, my clothes, and the few things I owned. When I grabbed my bag and turned toward the door, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. From above, thump, thump, thump. Back and forth. Back and forth. And then, silence. I moved out that evening. Didn't bother waiting for my security deposit. Didn't even take half my stuff. I just wanted out. That night, I stayed at a friend's place across town. Didn't sleep. Every sound, a creak, a whisper of wind made me jump. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I shouldn't have answered it, but I did. At first, there was only static. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured. The same pattern I'd heard for weeks. I whispered, "Who is this?" No answer. The footsteps stopped, and then, faintly, the sound of a woman's voice. She was whispering something, but it was too soft to make out. I turned the volume up, pressing the phone to my ear. The whisper grew clearer, and what she said froze every muscle in my body. "You shouldn't have opened the door." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped it. When I looked at the screen again, the call log was empty. No incoming number, no record of the call. Just one new voicemail notification. I played it. The same sound, footsteps. Then a knock. 3 times. Knock. 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 And then her voice again, closer this time, almost gentle. "I found you." I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and shattered. The next morning, I went back to Shanti Residency. Not inside, just across the street. The building looked quiet, lifeless. But then I saw it. In the window of apartment 302, someone was standing there. A woman, long dark hair, face pale as ash. She was watching me. and just before I turned away, she lifted her hand and waved. That was the last time I saw her. But sometimes, late at night, when the city goes still, I swear I can hear it again. The slow, steady sound of footsteps. Thump, 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 coming from the ceiling. And then, silence. My name's Alex Turner. I moved to Chicago just over a year ago, fresh out of college and scrambling to find work while figuring out life on my own. I wasn't from the city. I grew up in a small town in Illinois, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your business, and probably your secrets too. Chicago was bigger, louder, and lonelier, but it had opportunities, jobs, apartments, a chance to vanish into the crowd. I found a studio apartment in an old brick complex tucked into a quiet side street in the Loop. The rent was cheap, the location convenient, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. I told myself I'd stay only as long as it took to save up some money, maybe a year. That's all. The building was old, built sometime in the 1950s. It had the quirks you expect from a structure that's been standing for decades. Creaking floorboards, hallways that smelled faintly of mildew, and pipes that rattled at odd hours. But for the first few months, I didn't mind. It was home enough. It was during those early weeks that I noticed something odd. The basement lights never turned off. No matter the hour, no matter who swore they had flipped the switch, the fluorescent bulbs buzzed steadily, casting their harsh, clinical glow across the rows of laundry machines. The maintenance man, a graying fellow named Carl, insisted he turned them off every night. "Kid, that building's older than my uncle," he said once, scrubbing his hands on a rag. "Sometimes the lights just stay on. Happens all the time. But the lights never stayed off." At first, I tried to ignore it. I had enough stress navigating the city, adjusting to work, and trying to figure out how to pay my bills. I walked past the basement door every day, pretending the hum didn't bother me. I told myself it was just old wiring, stubborn and unreliable. But then I noticed patterns. The hum from the basement was louder at night, rising above the usual creaks and groans of the old building. Shadows flickered under the lights, moving in the corners where nothing could cast them. The air felt heavier as I approached the door, tinged with a sharp, metallic smell I couldn't place. I told myself I was imagining things. I work long hours, I'm tired, my mind is playing tricks. But the unease wouldn't go away. I asked neighbors about it. Some laughed. "Old buildings, kid," one said. "Lights get stuck on." That's all. Others avoided eye contact, giving me quick, uneasy glances. It was like mentioning the basement made them nervous. One woman, who had lived in the building for over 20 years, muttered as I passed, "Don't go down there at night. Trust me." The maintenance man, Carl, seemed hesitant when I brought it up again. "You don't want to go down there," he said, lowering his voice. "Just let it be." Of course, that only made me more curious. I had always been a curious person, always the one poking around, asking questions, investigating things that others ignored. It had gotten me in trouble before, but it also kept me alive when I was younger and exploring abandoned barns in my hometown. Now, standing outside the basement door, I felt that same compulsion tug at me. I had to know. That night, after everyone else in the building had gone quiet, I grabbed my flashlight and the old key the landlord had given me for the laundry room. My hand shook as I turned the doorknob. The stairs leading down were narrow, cold concrete. Each step echoed against the walls. The basement smelled of damp stone and mildew, but beneath that, a metallic tang lingered, sharp and biting. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, unblinking, washing the rows of washing machines and dryers in a harsh, almost surgical glow. And then I noticed the machines were running, unplugged, humming steadily, cords dangling limply, disconnected from any power source. Shadows twisted under the lights, not cast by anything real, shapes sliding across the floor and walls. I swung the flashlight toward them. They recoiled, elongated unnaturally. Then I saw the floor itself, panels that shouldn't have been there, almost like doors. Shapes moved beneath them, long, fluid, impossible. The basement wasn't just below the building. It was below something else, something alive. My heart pounded. I wanted to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, flashlight trembling in my hand, staring at the humming rows of laundry machines. Unplugged, unmoving, yet alive with that low, steady vibration. The air was thick, almost viscous, like it wanted to hold me there. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. I had to know. Step by step, I crept forward, the concrete floor cold beneath my sneakers. The shadows in the corners writhed and stretched, moving with a life of their own. Every step made the hum from the machines grow louder, more insistent, like a pulse synchronized to my heartbeat. I reached the first row of dryers. My flashlight beam swept across the rusted metal doors. The hum shifted slightly, almost as if the machines were responding to me. I blinked, convinced I imagined it. And then I saw it, fingerprints. Not just smudges, but detailed prints pressed into the metal doors, as if someone, or something, had been using the machines recently. Dust settled unevenly around them. Some prints looked fresh, others faded, but no one was there. A chill ran down my spine. I whispered to myself, "It's just the building, just the old building." But the basement was anything but ordinary. I kept moving, flashlight sweeping over the floor, the walls, the ceiling, and then I noticed the panels along the far wall. Concrete, number, thin slabs hinged at the edges. Something moved beneath them, something fluid and impossible, shifting beneath the surface of the floor. I knelt down, placing my hand near one of the panels. The vibrations were stronger here, almost like tiny deliberate movements beneath the concrete. A whisper echoed in my ear, soft, urgent, almost pleading. I spun around. Empty basement. The machines hummed louder. The shadows stretched toward me. I realized then, whatever was below the floor was aware of me, watching me. I tried to back away, but my curiosity was relentless. I wanted to see more, to understand. I moved to the back of the basement, toward the largest panel. The vibrations here were intense, almost like something alive was pressing against it from below. I shone my flashlight over the surface. The panel was warped, almost like it had been under pressure for decades. I pressed my ear against it. Movement, scraping, whispered words I couldn't understand. And then, a sound that made my stomach drop. A voice, clear, distinct, right beneath me. "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled back, my flashlight swinging wildly. The shadows recoiled, but then stretched again, longer, darker, writhing under the light. My pulse raced. I felt frozen in place. I realized something horrifying. The basement wasn't just below the building. It was below something else, something vast, something ancient. And the basement was a threshold. I moved along the walls, scanning for clues. The basement was enormous, far larger than the footprint of the building should allow. Rows of machines hummed, lights flickered, shadows moved with unnatural intelligence. The smell grew stronger, metallic, earthy, like blood mixed with rust. Then I saw it, an old dusty journal lying on the floor near one of the machines. I picked it up. The cover read, "Maintenance Notes, 1957, scrawled in neat handwriting. Flipping through the pages, I found descriptions that chilled me. Lights stay on no matter the switch position. Machines hum even when unplugged. Shadows move without source. Floors vibrate at night. Residents report whispers. Do not open panels. Something below stirs if disturbed." The notes were written by a maintenance worker decades ago. He described the same phenomena I was witnessing. Machines running without power, shadows that moved, whispers that followed residents. His handwriting became erratic near the end. The last line, scrawled in large letters. "It's not the basement. It's beneath something else. And it watches." My heart hammered. I realized that whatever was down here wasn't confined to the basement. The basement was a gateway. Something below the building had been active for decades, unnoticed, feeding on fear or curiosity, or maybe something worse. I took a cautious step toward it was a gateway. Something below the building had been active for decades, unnoticed, feeding on fear or curiosity, or maybe something worse. I took a cautious step toward one of the floor panels, compelled to see beneath it. The vibrations intensified. A low growl, almost imperceptible at first, emanated from below. Shadows twisted violently under the fluorescent lights. The air became heavier, pressing down on my chest. And then I saw it. A shape, long, sinuous, moving under the floor panels. Too large, too fluid to be human. It shifted and twisted, writhing as if alive, aware of my presence. The whispers returned, now clearly forming words, though not in any language I understood. "Stay! Stay! Stay!" I stumbled backward. My flashlight fell, spinning beams across the room. Shadows twisted. The machines hummed louder, vibrating with impossible energy. I ran, tripping over a dryer cord, scrambling up the stairs. I didn't look back. Outside, I gasped for air in the quiet street. The city's lights felt normal, mundane, like a shield. But I couldn't forget. The basement wasn't ordinary. It wasn't part of the building, and it never slept. The next night, the lights were still on. Shadows still moved. The hum never stopped. And I knew I hadn't seen the worst of it. I didn't sleep that night, not a minute. Even in my new apartment, across town, my mind kept drifting back to the basement. The fluorescent lights, the humming machines, the impossible shadows, and the whispers. By morning, I knew I couldn't just leave it. I had to understand. I had to know what was below. I spent the day preparing. I packed a backpack with a flashlight, batteries, gloves, and a small crowbar. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything reckless. I would observe, take notes, and maybe find a clue as to what had been happening for decades in that building. By evening, I returned. The street outside the building was quiet, the city settling into its usual nighttime rhythm. I slipped inside, heart pounding as I crept toward the basement door. The hum greeted me before I even reached it, low and insistent. The fluorescent lights buzzed, and I felt that same oppressive weight in the air, heavier than gravity should allow. I descended the stairs slowly. Each step echoed against the concrete walls, each vibration in the floor beneath me resonating with that impossible hum. The basement was worse than I remembered. Shadows twisted across the walls as if alive. Machines hummed in the same rhythm, cords dangling uselessly. The air was thick, metallic, tasting of rust and wet earth. I shined my flashlight across the floor panels along the far wall. Movement. Something was shifting beneath them. Not small shapes. Something vast, too large to fit the basement if it were confined. And it wasn't hiding. It was aware, waiting, watching. I swallowed hard and approached one of the panels, forcing myself to kneel and look closer. The vibrations were stronger now, almost like the thing below was pressing against the concrete, feeling me. My flashlight flickered. The shadows in the corners twisted toward me like tendrils. A whisper came, louder this time, clearer. "You shouldn't be here. Leave. Leave." I realized then that it wasn't just the basement. It was beneath something else. Something older, larger, impossible. The basement was just the top layer, a thin veil over whatever lay beneath. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move further along the wall. Another panel creaked under my fingers. I hesitated. The vibrations under it pulsed like a heartbeat, and then I heard it, a soft, wet scraping sound, like claws dragging over stone coming from beneath the floor. I froze. My pulse raced. My flashlight beam danced across the basement, and in that moment, I saw a shadow detach itself from the corner of the room. It moved with unnatural speed, sliding across the floor, stretching impossibly long. It paused, hovering in front of me, and I felt an invisible pressure against my chest. And then I saw the shapes beneath the panels move in concert with the shadow. They weren't just shadows. They were extensions of something alive, reaching, stretching, aware of me. I stumbled back, tripping over a dryer cord. The flashlight clattered to the floor, spinning light across the basement. In that spinning beam, I glimpsed it, a vast serpentine form writhing beneath the panels, dark and wet, impossibly long. Its edges were indistinct, merging with the shadows of the room, and yet I could feel its presence, intelligent and malevolent. The whispers were everywhere now, a chorus of voices, some pleading, some angry, some hungry. "Stay, come, feed." I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, vibrating with a low, resonant hum. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, casting erratic shadows across the floor. I ran, not toward the stairs, not toward safety, but blindly through the rows of machines, tripping over cords, crashing into dryers, trying to escape the pressure, the whispers, the thing beneath the basement. And then I saw it, the first direct manifestation. A face, if you could call it that, pressed up from beneath a panel, human-like in shape, but distorted, elongated, melting into shadow. It stared at me with hollow eyes, and a grin stretched impossibly wide. The thing beneath the basement was not confined to the shadows. It was beginning to emerge. I screamed and bolted for the stairs. The basement seemed to stretch infinitely around me, walls elongating, machines multiplying, shadows reaching for me with tendrils of darkness. I didn't stop running until I burst out into the quiet street. My chest heaved. My clothes were torn, hands scraped on concrete. The hum, the lights, the shadows, all of it had receded into the basement, but I knew it hadn't gone away. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination, stress, exhaustion, paranoia. But then the signs appeared elsewhere. shadows moving at the edge of my vision in my apartment. Whispers just faint enough to make me question my sanity. And worst of all, the floorboards of my new apartment vibrated faintly at night, in a rhythm that matched the basement hum. It followed me. The basement hadn't just been below the building. It had been below something else, and whatever it was no longer confined. I couldn't stay away. Even after the basement incident, after running into the street gasping for air, I found myself drawn back. Every night I felt it, a pull, a vibration beneath my feet, a hum in the floorboards of my apartment that matched the basement perfectly. I tried ignoring it, staying at friends' places, taking late-night walks around the city, anything to distance myself. But it followed me, always. I realized then, leaving wasn't enough. To stop it, I had to face it. I returned to the building one rainy evening. The streets were slick, reflecting the orange glow of streetlights, the hum of traffic muted by the drizzle. I gripped my backpack tightly. Flashlight, gloves, crowbar, and a digital recorder I'd bought to document everything. I had no plan, only the compulsion to understand. The basement door loomed ahead, humming faintly as if greeting me. I swallowed my fear and descended the stairs. The basement was alive. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder than ever, casting stark, harsh shadows. Machines hummed in perfect synchronization, cords dangling uselessly. Shadows twisted and reached along the floor and walls. The air was thick, metallic, and sharp, smelling of rust, mildew, and something older, earthier, darker. I reached the back of the basement, near the panels. My flashlight swept across them. The vibrations under the panels were stronger than ever, pulsing like a heartbeat. Something was moving beneath, something massive, ancient, aware of me. I forced myself to kneel near one of the panels, pressing my hand against the cold concrete. The vibration was unmistakable now, like something alive was brushing against me from below. A whisper, louder than ever. "You shouldn't be here. Come." And then the panel shifted. Not cracked, not broken, but warping, like something massive was pushing against it from beneath. My flashlight flickered. I heard scraping, wet and deliberate, like claws or talons over stone. I stepped back, shaking, but then I did something I never thought I would. I lifted the crowbar and pried the panel open. The thing beneath the basement revealed itself. It was immense, a writhing mass of shadow and flesh, its edges indistinct, melting into the darkness. Human in shape, only in the faintest ways. Limbs too long, joints bending wrong, faces emerging briefly and melting into nothingness. Its eyes, or what passed for eyes, glowed faintly in the darkness beneath the floor, intelligent and malevolent. The shadows in the basement converged on me, elongating and stretching like fingers reaching from the void. Machines hummed louder, vibrating violently, lights flickering as if in panic. The whispers became a chorus, loud, urgent, pleading, and threatening all at once. "Stay, feed, belong!" I stumbled backward, dropping the crowbar. My flashlight beam swung wildly, catching glimpses of multiple faces forming and dissolving in the writhing mass. Each face grinned impossibly wide, eyes hollow, mouths stretching beyond human limits. I realized the basement hadn't been below the building. The basement was the surface of something else, a barrier between our world and whatever this was. And the thing had been watching for decades, feeding on curiosity, fear, the lives of those brave, or foolish, enough to enter. I ran. not toward safety, but blindly, back across the basement, dodging tendrils of shadow that lashed toward me. The machines clanged and shook violently, the cords lashing like snakes. The lights flickered and buzzed, threatening to go out entirely. I reached the stairs, scrambled upward, and burst into the rain-soaked street. My chest heaved, lungs burning, eyes stinging from the mist and cold. The city seemed normal, ordinary, mundane, but I knew it was a lie. Over the next few days, I tried to piece together what I had seen. Researching the building's history, I discovered it had been constructed atop the ruins of an older structure, a warehouse that had burned decades before. Tenants had reported disappearances, shadows in the corners, strange lights. Maintenance logs from the 1950s and 60s mentioned unexplainable phenomena: humming machines, moving shadows, and vibrations beneath the floors. All the signs pointed to one truth. Whatever I had seen in the basement wasn't confined to that space anymore. It had expanded, and it was aware of me. I decided to record my observations, thinking documentation might somehow anchor me, make sense of it. I set up a small camera in the basement, carefully avoiding detection. When I reviewed the footage later, I almost didn't believe it. The machines hummed, unplugged. Shadows moved across the floor, independent of any light source. And beneath the panels, the mass shifted, stretching, moving with impossible fluidity. Faces emerged, some human, some monstrous, all staring at the camera with hollow, intelligent eyes. It watched. And then I noticed the most terrifying part. The basement wasn't just below the building. It was beneath something else entirely. Beneath the city itself, connected to underground tunnels, old subway lines, forgotten sewers. The thing had been feeding, growing, learning for decades, unnoticed, waiting for the right moment. That night, I returned once more. Not to explore, but to confront. I needed answers. I needed to see it fully. I brought everything I had: flashlight, crowbar, recorder, gloves, even a fire extinguisher. I descended the stairs, past the humming lights, past the stretching shadows. The thing was awake. I could feel it pressing up from below the floor. I pressed my hand to the vibration, and for the first time, I felt it. Not just as a machine-like hum, but as a living presence, cold, hungry, intelligent. I whispered, "What are you?" And it responded, not with words, but with an overwhelming sensation, a flood of images in my mind, centuries of watching, feeding, existing beneath the city, beneath the lives of people oblivious above. It was not human, not entirely. It was old, older than the city, older than the building, a predator of space and curiosity, waiting for the weak, the brave, the foolish. I realized then that my curiosity had marked me. It had known I would come back. It had wanted me here. I ran, up the stairs, out into the rain-soaked street. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The hum followed me, faintly, through the building walls, into the streets, into my apartment. It was always there now, always watching, always waiting. I stopped going to work 2 weeks ago. At first, I told myself it was because I needed rest, that after everything in the basement, I just needed time to recover. But that was a lie. The truth is, I can't leave my apartment anymore. The shadows follow me. The hum doesn't stop. And when I close my eyes, I see the panels, the faces, the writhing black mass that isn't bound to the basement anymore. It's beneath everything now. Beneath the streets, beneath the city, beneath me. The nights are the worst. Around 12:15 a.m., Always 12:15 the hum starts. It begins faint, almost imperceptible, like a train passing far underground. Then it grows, vibrating through the floorboards, the walls, even the air itself. The lights flicker once, twice, then stay on just like in the basement. I've taped over every outlet, unplugged everything, even flipped the breakers off at the main panel. But still, the lights stay on. They hum, they vibrate, they whisper, and sometimes they breathe. The first time I heard the breathing, I thought it was just my imagination. A slow, steady exhale, too rhythmic to be random, too human to be mechanical. It came from the corner of my room, where the shadows pooled the darkest. I shone my flashlight there, but the light bent strangely, like hitting fog or heat distortion. And then I saw movement. A ripple in the air, subtle at first, then unmistakable like something enormous shifting just beyond sight. I dropped the flashlight, and as it rolled across the floor, I saw the light distort again, bending over an invisible shape that seemed to crawl along the ceiling. I screamed and ran into the hallway, heart hammering, but the hum followed. It was under my feet, through the walls, in my bones. That's when I realized the basement isn't a place anymore. It's spreading. I tried recording it. The footage plays normally at first my apartment, dark, lit only by the faint flicker of the ceiling light. Then, around 12:15, the light flares white, and the hum fills the audio. The camera shakes slightly, though I didn't touch it, and then a shape appears. Not in the corner this time, but on the ceiling. A dark, rippling mass, humanoid but wrong. Limbs too long, movements too smooth, like it's made of liquid shadow. It crawls slowly down the wall toward the camera, face flickering in and out of focus, as if the lens can't decide if it's human or not. Then, the camera cuts to static. I tried watching the footage again the next day, but the file was corrupted. The timestamp still read 12:15 a.m. I haven't told anyone. Who would believe me? The police would laugh. My friend stopped answering my calls after the first week. My landlord thinks I'm having a breakdown. Maybe I am. But every night it gets worse. The hum's louder. The shadows stretch further. The air grows thicker, colder, harder to breathe. And last night, I heard voices. Dozens of them. They came from under the floor, whispering in unison, calling my name. Some sounded angry, some desperate, some familiar. "Alex, come back. It's waiting. You belong below." The floorboards began to warp, the wood flexing like something was pressing up from beneath. The air filled with a smell I'll never forget, damp earth, metal, and decay. The same smell from the basement. And then I saw it. A crack split open between the floorboards, no wider than my thumb. But through it, I could see movement writhing, twisting shapes, shifting like they were alive. And beneath that, eyes. Hundreds of them. I ran out of my apartment, barefoot, tearing down the stairs. But when I reached the lobby, the lights were already on. Bright fluorescent lights. Buzzing, humming. The hum vibrated through the tile floor, the same pulse as before. And when I looked up, I saw them faint outlines on the far wall, shifting, human-shaped shadows moving against the light with no one there to cast them. The basement had followed me up. It's been 3 days since then. I haven't gone outside again. Every time I approach the door, the hum gets louder. The lights flicker. The shadows stretch toward me, blocking my way. I've started hearing scratching behind the walls now, soft but constant. like fingernails tracing patterns in the drywall. I think it's trying to find another way in. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I hear footsteps above me, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth, just like before. But I live on the top floor now. There's nothing above me. There shouldn't be. Last night I woke to find my bedroom light on again. The hum was deafening. The air vibrated. And when I turned my head, I saw them, a row of figures standing at the end of my bed. Shadows, all facing me, their outlines faint and flickering under the fluorescent glow. Behind them, the wall rippled like water. Something massive pressed against it, distorting the paint, the plaster, the studs beneath. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The figures leaned forward, all at once, their faces stretching and twisting into impossible shapes. Their mouths opened wide, wider than should be humanly possible. And then, in unison, they whispered, "You opened the floor, Alex. Now we open the sky." The ceiling split open. Light poured down, blinding, searing white, and beneath it, I saw darkness moving, endless and alive. I don't remember what happened after that. I woke on the floor hours later, the lights still on, the hum still pulsing, the shadows still watching. I think it's only a matter of time now. The basement was never a room, it was a threshold, and I crossed it. The lights in this place never turn off anymore. And when I sleep, I dream of stairs, endless stairs leading down. Down past the building, down past the city, down past the earth. And at the bottom, something is waiting.